Barney Riggs stands in the middle of a dusty Texas street. The sun is hot, the air is still. In his right hand, he holds a worn wooden cane. In front of him is a younger man, Daniel Buck Shadbourne, tense and afraid. His fingers close to the grip of a pistol at his side. Barney takes a step forward. His face is red with anger. He has been angry for a long time. Angry at life. Angry at his losses. Angry at anyone who dares to stand in his way. He raises the cane. Just a little. Buck has seen this look before. He remembers the pain from the last beating. He remembers the shame of being hit in front of other men. This time, he makes a different choice. His hand moves faster than thought. There is a flash. There is a shot, then another, and another. Barney staggers, surprise in his eyes. For a moment, he looks almost confused, as if he cannot understand how this is happening to him. He has lived through so many fights, so many dangers, so many close calls. He has survived prison, gunfights, and feuds. But this is how it ends. He falls to the dusty ground, the cane slipping from his fingers. People run, doors open, voices shout. They say a gunfighter must always be ready. They say a man like Barney Riggs can never let down his guard. Yet in this final moment, he did not bring a gun. He brought a cane to a gunfight. Many years before that last walk down the street, Barney Kemp Riggs was just a boy. He was born on December 18, 1856. The exact place is not fully clear, but most stories say Arkansas. He was the second of 7 children. His parents were Thomas and Hannah Riggs, simple frontier people who wanted land, food, and a better life. Like many families of that time, they moved west. They went to Texas, where the land was open and wild. There were no big cities, no real safety. There was only hard work, open sky, and danger in every direction. Barney grew up in this rough world. He did not have toys or school books like children today. He had horses, ropes, and guns. From an early age, he learned to ride. He learned to work with cattle. He learned to handle a pistol and a rifle. On the frontier, knowing how to shoot was not a game. It was survival. People who later remembered Barney said he had a quick temper. He did not like being disrespected. He did not like losing. He was not the kind of boy who walked away from a fight. Even as a teenager, he already seemed older than his years. In a place where many men carried guns, Barney was the kind of person others watched carefully. The Riggs family itself had a reputation for trouble. Over time, more than one member of the family would be connected to violence and death. Some would go to court, some would stand trial, some would walk free, some would not. The family name became linked with blood and bullets. In that kind of family, in that kind of land, Barney's future began to take shape. Life on the Texas frontier was not fair or easy. There were no cameras, no phones, no quick calls to the police. Many things that happened were never written down. Arguments over land, over cattle, over women, or over pride could turn deadly in seconds. A look, a word, or a drink too many might be all it took. Barney grew up watching grown men act on anger. He saw how the strong pushed the weak. He saw how people with fast hands and cold nerves often got their way. He learned that, in this world, a man could be both hero and villain, depending on who told the story. One day, as a young man, he would make a terrible mistake that turned into his first killing. But even before that moment, the path he walked was already dangerous. As a boy, he probably did not see himself as a future gunfighter. He was just trying to live. He woke up early, worked hard, and tried to keep up with his older relatives. He drove cattle, fixed fences, and slept under the open sky. He might have joked with friends, flirted with girls, and dreamed of owning his own land one day. But there was something inside him that would not let go his temper. When things went wrong, he did not let them go. When he felt insulted, he did not forget. Small fires inside him grew into big flames. In a calm world, maybe his anger would have been just a problem. In the violent Old West, it became deadly. The guns did not help too many men in Texas. A gun was like a second hand. It was always there, always ready. They carried pistols, in belts, in pockets, undercoats. They set rifles against walls and leaned shotguns by doors. It was normal to see weapons everywhere. People said guns meant protection, but they also meant that every argument had the power to end a life. Barney grew into this reality. He became skilled, fast, and confident with weapons. Other young men might tease, shout, or push. Barney was the kind of young man who could end an argument with a single quick draw. Even if he did not always use his gun, people knew he could. And when people know you can do something deadly, the way they treat you starts to change. Some gave him respect. Some gave him space. Some gave him fear. Little by little, that changes a man. It feeds his pride. It makes him feel untouchable. It whispers, nothing can really happen to you. For a time, that seemed true. Barney stayed ahead of trouble. But trouble was always moving, always catching up. Just a step behind. He did not know yet that one day he would face judges and juries. He did not know he would walk through the gates of a hot stone prison called Yuma. He did not know he would someday save a man's life behind those walls and earn his own freedom with a gunshot. He did not know that he would shoot and kill men in a saloon in Pecos, Texas. He did not know his love life would crash, that his marriage would end, and that a young man named Buck Shadbourne would win. They stand between him and his money. All of that was still in the future. For now, he was just Barney Riggs, the boy turning into a young man, living on the edge of a wild land. He was sharp, strong, and dangerous without fully understanding how dangerous he really was. The road from that young cowboy to the fallen man in the dusty street is long and full of blood. It is a story of anger and pride, jealousy and revenge, fear and survival. It is the story of a person who kept getting second chances until there were no more chances left. This is the beginning of that story. Barney Riggs is now a young man. The frontier is changing, but danger still hangs in the air around every ranch in town. In Texas, a person could wake up calm in the morning and be dead by sunset. Small choices could shape a whole life. And for Barney, one mistake was about to start the long, violent path that would follow him forever. He had grown into a strong, confident cowboy. He rode well, worked hard, and spoke little. But inside him lived the same temper he had since childhood. It waited, silent and hot, like fire under dry wood. By the time he was around 18, Barney had friends, work, and a growing reputation. People in Saloon, Texas, knew him as a young man who did not back down. He was not yet famous or feared, but he was remembered for his boldness and sharp tongue. Then came the day that changed everything. It was ordinary at first. Barney was with his friend Hugh Armstrong, someone he trusted. The two young men were spending time together, probably joking, maybe cleaning guns, maybe passing the time after a long workday. That part of the story has been lost, but everyone agrees on what came next. A gun fired, a single shot, a life ended. Hugh Armstrong fell to the ground, bleeding, dying, and Barney Riggs, shocked and confused, stared at the smoking weapon in his own hands. People later said it was an accident. Maybe it was. Guns at that time were sensitive. One wrong move, one slip of the finger, one careless moment could kill a man instantly. But accident or not, the result was the same. Hugh was dead, and Barney Riggs had fired the shot. News travels fast in small towns. People whispered. Mothers pulled children away. Men looked at Barney differently. Some believed him, others did not. But one thing was certain. The sheriff wanted to ask questions, and Barney did not wait around to answer them. Before the law could catch up, he was gone. He packed what little he owned, mounted his horse, and rode west. He did not write to his family. He did not say goodbye. He simply disappeared into the open land, leaving behind a dead friend and a town full of questions. That ride marked the true beginning of Barney Riggs' life as a wanderer, a man running from a past that would only get heavier with time. When Barney first reached Arizona, it was a new world. Rugged land stretched in all directions. Mountains rose from the desert like stone giants. There were mines, cattle ranches, small settlements, and outlaw trails along the border. Two of Barney's uncles lived there, including Jim Riggs, who ran a ranch in Cochise County. Family took care of their own, especially in the West. Jim gave Barney work, shelter, and a chance to start again. For a while, Barney seemed to settle into ranch life. He rode with cowboys across the dry land. He slept under the stars. He carried a gun, but so did everyone. Nothing about him yet stood out more than the rest. Then he met Vinnie Hicklin, a local young woman from the small town of Dos Cabezas. She was likely kind, cheerful, and hopeful everything the rough life of the frontier tried to crush. To Barney, she was a bright spot in a lonely world. They married on February 21st, 1882. For a moment, Barney's life looked normal. A wife, a job, a fresh start. But under the surface, the same anger, the same wildness, the same sense of danger was still there. It followed him like a shadow. Arizona was full of opportunities, but not only good ones. Across the border in Mexico, horses were stolen, cattle disappeared in the night, and armed men rode silently through dark ravines. Some called it outlaw work. Others just called it survival. Barney fell in with the wrong sort of men. He began riding on horse-stealing trips. They moved fast under moonlight, crossing rough ground, leading stolen animals back north. To some, it was easy money. To others, it was criminal. To Barney, it was just another risk. But one night, things went terribly wrong. The group stopped at a remote watering hole, a lonely place far from towns. There, they found 2 Mexican men and 3 women. Something happened, an argument, a fight, a rising tension. The exact details are lost, but the outcome was not. 2 of the men were killed. The women were left unharmed at first. Then, perhaps driven by fear of being recognized, or by cold calculation, Barney returned. He killed the women to daughter, so the stories claimed. These deaths were not recorded by any court. There was no trial, no official record, only whispered tales carried by time. But the fact that such rumors followed Barney for the rest of his life tells something important. People believed he was capable of it. Whether the story was true or not, the shadow of that night clung to him. It made him harder, colder, more dangerous. Life moved on. Trouble did not stop Barney from working or from being part of bigger events. Around this time, the famous Earp brothers were fighting their enemies in Arizona. The story connected to the gunfight at the OK Corral. After that legendary battle, Wyatt Earp and his men rode out seeking vengeance. The local sheriff, Johnny B. formed a posse to chase them. Among the men he called into service was none other than Barney Riggs. Barney now wore a badge, even if the motives behind it were not pure. One month he was riding with outlaws. The next, he was riding with the law. That's how the West worked. Lines were blurry, loyalties thin, justice fragile, and Barney was comfortable in that world. He could be a cowboy on Monday, a rustler on Tuesday, a deputy on Wednesday. What mattered was survival, and Barney survived well. But life does not let a man outrun his past forever. And soon, jealousy, betrayal, and violent temper would lead him into his next storm. A storm that would end with a man dead, Barney on the run, and a prison cell waiting in Yuma. Barney Riggs had survived the rough Texas frontier. He had escaped questions about a friend's death. He had traveled across wild country and built a new life in Arizona. For a moment, things almost looked peaceful. He had a job, he had a wife, he had a small place to belong. But peace never stayed long around Barney. Inside him lived the same anger, the same pride, and the same habit of letting emotion control his decisions. And in the harsh world of the 1880s, one wrong decision could ruin everything. That moment arrived slowly, starting with whispers and turning into tragedy. When Barney married Vennie Hicklin, he hoped for a simple life. Vennie was young, gentle, and loyal. She believed Barney could be a good husband, even if he carried a dark past. They tried to build a life on her family's ranch land and the land owned by Barney's uncle, Jim Riggs. But as time passed, cracks formed in their marriage. Barney worked long days. Money was always tight. The frontier was stressful and lonely, and Barney's temper grew worse. Sometimes he lashed out at people in town. Sometimes he argued loudly with Vennie. Sometimes he disappeared for days without explaining where he had gone. In the small community, around Dos Cabezas and Wilcox, people started talking. Rumors spread that Vennie was spending time with Richmond Hudson, a man who worked with the Riggs family and was the stepson of Barney's uncle Jim. Hudson was friendly and talkative, the opposite of Barney's quiet, brooding nature. Some said the two were close. Some said nothing happened at all. But the whispers were enough to a man like Barney Riggs. Rumors were poison. At first, Vennie denied everything. She said Hudson was only a friend. She insisted there was no secret between them. She wanted to keep her marriage together, and for a brief moment, Barney tried to believe her. But then something happened that changed everything. Hudson began bragging around the ranch. He told other men that Barney was gone a lot, that he and Venny were friendly, and that Barney didn't know what was happening under his own roof. People who heard Hudson talk said he smiled when he said it, whether Hudson spoke the truth or was simply trying to impress others. His words were dangerous. They reached Barney like a spark reaching dry grass. The anger inside him exploded. In 1886, the tension broke. Hudson was working alone near the Riggs ranch. Barney had been away on a cattle trip, but he returned quietly, listening, watching, thinking. He confronted Hudson once, and Hudson denied any affair. But after the bragging reached him again, Barney made a decision, a terrible one. On September 29, 1886, Hudson was shot from ambush. A single rifle bullet struck him in the head. He fell to the ground instantly, dead before he touched the dirt. There were no witnesses. There were no written notes. But almost everyone believed the same thing. They believed Barney Riggs pulled the trigger. The sheriff sent out warnings across the territory. Word spread fast. A $250 reward was offered for Barney's capturer. Large sum in those days. Barney ran again. He knew the woods, the hills, and the hidden paths around the ranch. For weeks, he stayed out of sight, slipping through the shadows, avoiding lawmen. But no man could run forever, and one man in particular was waiting for his chance to catch Barney. His name was Fred Dodge, a well-known lawman and undercover agent. Dodge was experienced, calm, and patient. He believed Barney would try to see Venny again before fleeing for good. So he and a deputy hid near the Riggs home and watched night after night. They waited. Then, one evening, they saw a rider in the darkness. The man signaled toward the house. A quiet whistle, a small gesture, something only meant for someone inside. Dodge stepped forward and called out. The rider turned his horse, trying to escape, but Dodge fired, wounding the horse. The rider hit the ground hard. It was Barney Riggs. He was arrested on the spot. Barney was taken into custody, facing a murder charge. Venny was brought in for questioning. She was shaken, frightened, and confused. What she told investigators shocked everyone. She said that she was the one who shot Richmond Hudson. She said she did it because Hudson threatened her life. Her confession shook the room, but it also raised questions. Did she really kill Hudson, or was she trying to protect her husband from a life sentence or hanging? Most people believed she was protecting Barney. Her story didn't match the evidence. The gunshot came from a distance too far for a small woman in an emotional moment. The angle was strange. The details did not fit. And so, despite Venny's claim, the trial moved forward. The first trial ended in a mistrial. Some jurors thought Barney acted out of jealous rage. Others thought maybe Venny played a bigger role. Some even believed Hudson had mistreated her. But the law did not forget. The second trial was more clear. The judge insisted the case be focused on evidence, not emotion. Witnesses described Hudson's bragging. Others described Barney's explosive temper. People told the court how Barney had vanished right after the killing. This time, the jury agreed. Barney Riggs was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in the Yuma Territorial Prison at Yuma, one of the harshest prisons in the West. No open sky, no horses, no freedom. Just stone walls, iron bars, and desert heat. Barney had escaped trouble many times before, but now it seemed trouble had finally caught up with him. As the prison gates closed behind him, Barney believed his life was ending inside those walls. He did not know that something, strange something, unbelievable, was waiting for him inside Yuma Prison. Something that would turn him from prisoner into unexpected hero. Asterisk, the iron gates of Yuma Territorial Prison closed behind Barney Riggs with a heavy, echoing sound. It was the sound of a life-ending war, so Barney believed. He had been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Richmond Hudson. Life meant forever. It meant no more open land, no more riding horses, no more freedom under the big desert sky. It meant waking up behind bars every morning until the day he died. Yuma Prison was not just any prison. People across the West whispered about it with fear. The prison sat on a rocky hill above the Colorado River. In the summer, the heat baked the stone walls until they felt like the sides of an oven. In winter, the desert wind cut through everything. The cells were small, dark, and packed with men who had nothing left to lose. Some said the prison was so hot that candles melted even when they were not lit. Some said men went crazy from the heat and the silence. Some said Yuma was a place where hope died. Barney walked into that world with shackles on his wrists and anger in his heart. He thought of Venny. He thought of the rumors. He thought of Hudson's face. He thought of running into the mountains but failing. All of it pressed down on him like the heavy, burning air. But Barney was not the type to cry or break. He kept his head up. He kept walking. His new life as prisoner Riggs had begun. The daily routine in Yuma was simple but brutal. At dawn, guards blew whistles. The prisoners woke up, sweating or shivering, depending on the month. They lined up. They marched. They worked under the sun carrying stone, hammering iron, gathering wood, digging, building. Barney worked like any other inmate. He kept quiet. He followed orders. He did not pick fights. He watched everything around him with calm eyes, taking in the rhythms of prison life. Many prisoners respected him. He was tough but not cruel, strong but not foolish. Some sensed the violence inside him, but they also sensed his control. A man like Barney could be a danger if pushed. The guards watched him too. They had heard stories. A cowboy with a temper, a gunman, a man who had run from sheriffs before. But in prison, he followed rules. That made him different from many of the loud, angry men locked alongside him. Still, nobody expected Barney Riggs to do anything heroic. Not the guards, not the warden, not even Barney himself. Yet life in the West had a strange way of turning men into something unexpected. One day, Yuma Prison exploded into chaos. It began like any other day. The sun rose heavy and bright. The prisoners marched to their tasks. Barney was working in the yard. His shirt stuck to his back from the heat. Then somewhere near the cell block, a shout broke the routine. Another shout followed. Then the crack of a gunshot. Eyes turned. Guards rushed. Prisoners froze. A group of 5 Mexican convicts had made a desperate plan to escape. They had armed themselves with smuggled knives. One had stolen a pistol. They broke out from their work group and ran toward the gates, attacking anyone in their way. In the chaos, one of the prisoners stabbed Superintendent Thomas Gates, the top official in the prison. Gates fell to the ground, bleeding, the attacker standing over him with a knife raised for a finishing blow. The yard exploded into shouting and confusion. Guards fired. Prisoners ducked. Dust rose in the air. Barney Riggs turned and saw something he did not expect. The man in charge of the entire prison bleeding, defenseless, about to die. Something inside Barney changed in that instant. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was old cowboy loyalty. Maybe it was the sudden feeling that he could not stand and watch a man be murdered. Whatever it was, Barney ran forward. One of the escaping convicts had a pistol, but a guard shot him in the chaos, and the man dropped the gun. Barney lunged for it, grabbed it, and spun around. The convict with the knife rushed toward him. Barney didn't hesitate. He fired once, hitting the attacker in the chest. The man stumbled, but kept moving. Barney shot again, this time to kill. The convict fell beside the wounded superintendent. Other guards moved in. The remaining escapees were captured or shot as they tried to flee. And just like that, the prison yard fell silent again. Dust floated slowly back to the ground. Men breathed hard. The danger passed. In the center of it all stood Barney Riggs, holding a gun, chest heaving, sweat pouring down his face. At his feet lay the attacker he had stopped. Behind him lay the superintendent he had saved. Guards stared at him. Prisoners stared at him. Even Barney seemed surprised at what he had done. He had not done it for praise. He had not done it for reward. He had done it because, in that moment, he could not stand still. And that decision changed his life. News spread fast inside Yuma. The superintendent lived, thanks to Barney. Guards whispered that Barney fought like he was one of us. Even prisoners respected him, because he took a huge risk to stop the attackers. The prison board heard the story. So did the governor. Reports were written describing Barney Riggs as brave, quick-thinking, and selfless. Witnesses repeated again and again. No man was more brave that day than Barney Riggs. The governor read those words carefully. He thought about the bravery. He thought about the chaos. He thought about the fact that Barney saved the life of a prison official, something almost no inmate would dare do. And then he made a decision that nobody expected. He signed a full pardon. Just 1 year after being sentenced to life, Barney Riggs walked out of the prison gates a free man. People were stunned. Some said he was lucky. Some said he didn't deserve it. But others said this was the one time Barney's courage outshined his violence. Barney himself would later joke about it, saying, "I shot a man to get into Yuma, and shot another to get out." It was dark humor. It was typical Barney. And it was only the beginning of the next chapter of his violent, unpredictable life, because freedom did not bring peace to Barney Riggs. It brought him straight back into the wild world of Texas, a place waiting with feuds, gunfights, and trouble, far deadlier than anything inside Yuma's walls. Barney Riggs walked out of Yuma Territorial Prison a free man. But freedom did not mean peace. Not for a man like him. The desert sun was bright. The air was hot. The world outside the prison walls felt wide again. But something in Barney had changed. He was older, harder, and quieter. He had faced death, saved a man's life, and walked through fire. Some men came out of Yuma broken. Barney came out sharper. He headed back toward the only place he knew well, Texas, the land of long rides and wider dangers, a place where guns were common, tempers short, and reputations built on how a man handled himself in bad situations. But Texas had changed since he left. There were new faces, new tensions, and old grudges waiting for him. When Barney arrived in Pecos County, he found work, friends, and trouble sometimes, all three mixed together. He drifted between jobs as a cowboy, a ranch hand, and at times, a lawman. The lines in the West were still blurry. A man could be a deputy 1 month and suspected of helping outlaws the next, and Barney knew how to live in that gray space. He made a fresh start with his second wife, Annie Stella Frazier, whom he married in 1891. Annie came from a strong Texas family. Her relatives were involved in the rough, violent Frazier-Miller feud, a deadly conflict tied to hired killers, crooked lawmen, and dangerous drifters. Barney stepped into that world the moment he said "I do." Some people marry into peace. Barney married into a storm. Annie's family name carried connections to men like James Killer Miller, a cold gunman linked to many mysterious deaths, and the family of John Wesley Hardin, the famous outlaw who once terrorized Texas. Whether Barney wanted it or not, these were now part of his everyday life. Around Pecos and Fort Stockton, Barney became known as a man who did not scare easily. He had survived prison. He had faced armed men. He owned a temper that could snap like dry wood. People respected him. Some feared him, and others wanted to test him. In the Old West, that combination often led to bloodshed. At the same time, Barney sometimes worked under Sheriff A.J. Royal, a man as tough and unpredictable as the land he served. Royal trusted Barney. They were similar both, quick-tempered, both feared, both used to operating outside the usual lines of the law. The sheriff's enemies became Barney's enemies. The sheriff's fights became Barney's fights. And in Pecos County, fights were never simple. Tension grew between different factions: ranchers, cowboys, lawmen, and hired guns. It was a world of whispers, alliances, and sudden violence. Barney Riggs was right in the middle of it. By the mid-1890s, the pressure around him was building like thunderclouds in summer. Then came the day that would define his reputation forever. The day of the Pecos Saloon gunfight. It was March 3rd, 1896. Barney was inside R.S. Johnson's saloon in Pecos. Some say he was tending bar as a favor. Others say he was simply there for a drink. The room smelled of tobacco and spilled whiskey. Men talked in low voices. Cards slapped against wooden tables. Outside, the wind blew dust through the street. Two men walked into the saloon bill, Earhart and John Denson. They were known troublemakers, tied to dangerous people. They had connections to the same criminal network around Killer Miller and Hardin's old circle. For days, maybe weeks, they had made threats. They did not like Barney. They did not trust him. Maybe they hated him. No one knows exactly why, but everyone knew something was brewing. When Earhart and Denson stepped inside, The air changed. Earhart's hand hovered close to his pistol. His eyes were sharp, his jaw tight. Denson moved with nervous energy. They were not there for a drink. They were there for something else. Barney turned calmly, wiping his hands on a cloth. He saw the danger instantly. A man like him had learned to read trouble from across the room. He knew these men were not bluffing. Still, he stood his ground. The three men stared at each other for a long second. Then everything happened at once. A shot rang out. Loud, sharp, echoing through the wooden walls. The bullet grazed Barney's head, slicing skin, drawing blood. It was Earhart's shot, fast, deadly, and meant to kill. But Barney was faster. He drew his gun with a quick, smooth motion, born from years of violence and instinct. He fired once, and in that single shot, Bill Earhart dropped to the floor, dead before he hit the ground. Gunpowder filled the air. People dove for cover. Chairs crashed. Cards scattered. Denson panicked. He ran for the door. He pushed past tables, knocking glasses aside, desperate to escape. But Barney followed. He stepped over Earhart's body, chased Denson outside, raised his pistol, and shot him. The bullet hit Denson in the back of the head. He collapsed face down in the dust of Pecos Street. The fight was over in seconds. 2 men dead, 1 man left standing. Barney Riggs walked back inside the saloon, blood on his face, smoke rising from his gun. He sat down and waited for the sheriff. He did not try to run. He did not need to. He had acted in self-defense, and everyone in the saloon had seen who shot first. Barney went to trial for the killings, but the jury believed his story. They believed the witnesses. They believed that if he had not drawn his weapon, he would have been the one lying dead in the street. He was acquitted. Once again, stepping out of the courthouse, a free man. Another close call. Another moment where Barney survived by being faster, harder, and more willing to kill than the men who challenged him. The Pecos gunfight sealed his reputation. From that day on, people spoke his name with a mix of fear and respect. Barney Riggs was no longer just a cowboy or a former prisoner. He was a gunfighter, a man who had killed more than once, a man who was comfortable living on the edge, a man many preferred not to anger. But trouble was not finished with him, not even close. As he grew older, Barney's life would fall apart piece by piece. His marriage, his peace, his friendships, and finally, the one thing he held on to longer than anything else, his sense of control. The story was about to move from feuds and gunfights to something more personal. The worst enemy Barney Riggs would ever face was not a gunman in a saloon. It was a young man in his own family. Asterisk, after the famous gunfight in Pecos, Barney Riggs walked the streets with a new kind of reputation. People stepped aside when he passed. Some nodded respectfully. Others made sure not to look him in the eye. In a land where guns often decided who lived and who died, Barney had proven again that he could survive almost anything. But strength in a gunfight did not mean strength at home. Behind the tough front, Barney's personal life was cracking in painful and quiet ways. Barney had married Annie Stella Frazier in 1891. She came from a respectable family, with roots deep in Texas history. Annie was strong, patient, and hardworking. She believed in family. She believed in loyalty. For a short time, she believed in Barney. But Barney was not an easy man to live with. He drank more as the years went on. Not every day, but often enough for it to cause trouble. When he drank, the calm voice he used around strangers disappeared. His sharp temper rose to the surface. He shouted. He argued. He slammed doors. Sometimes he left the house for days. He did not hit, and yet at least no record says so. But words can cut deeply, and Barney's words could be as sharp as a knife. Their home slowly became a battlefield of silence, cold looks, and mistrust. Annie tried to save their marriage. She talked to him gently. She tried to calm him. She tried to understand the deep storms inside him. But Barney would not change. Maybe he could not. He was a man shaped by violence, jealousy, and pride. A man who lived through feuds, ambushes, and prison riots. A man who solved problems with force. And force has no place in a marriage. Annie grew tired. Tired of fear. Tired of shouting. Tired of watching Barney drink himself into anger. Finally, she made a decision. In March 1901, Annie filed for divorce, a rare and serious step for a woman in that time. But she had enough proof of Barney's behavior to win. The court granted her freedom. The marriage was over. For Barney Riggs, this loss cut deeper than any bullet. The court did not simply end the marriage. It also made rules. Barney was ordered to pay support to Annie, money he owed every month, money he did not want to part with, money that he believed was still his dot. And the court did something that lit a fire inside him. They assigned a trustee to handle the payments. Not a lawyer, not a court clerk, not a neutral middleman. They chose Daniel J. Buck Shadbourne, Annie's young son-in-law from a previous marriage. Buck was only 21 years old, a young man, barely grown, barely experienced, and suddenly placed in charge of Barney Riggs' wallet. It was like throwing a match into a room full of gunpowder. Buck Shadbourne was not a fighter. He was not a gunman. He did not have Barney's rough history or violent skills. He was simply doing his job, collecting money for Annie, protecting her rights after the divorce. But Barney saw him as something else. Barney saw him as an insult. How dare a boy handle my money, he thought. How dare he get between me and my business? How dare anyone take Annie's side? The more Barney thought about it, the angrier he became. He began confronting Buck whenever he saw him in town. He used harsh words, threats, insults. Sometimes he cursed him loudly on the street. People watched uneasy because they knew Barney's temper was dangerous. Buck tried to avoid him, tried to stay polite, tried to do his duty without making things worse. But Barney kept pushing. And every time Barney pushed, Buck's fear grew. But so did his determination. There is a special kind of courage found in quiet men. The kind that wakes up slowly, like a fire that begins as a small ember and grows stronger when stirred. Buck did not want to fight, but he would not be bullied forever. The town knew something terrible was coming. They whispered in shops. They talked over fences. They shook their heads when they saw Barney walking stiffly through the streets with anger written all over his face. Even Annie sensed danger. She knew Barney too well. She knew he held grudges like a fist holds a gun. But nothing stopped the two men from colliding. One day in early April 1902, Barney finally snapped. Nobody knows exactly what started the fight. Maybe it was a word. Maybe it was a look. Maybe Barney woke up angry and decided that Buck Shadbourne was the easiest target for the fury inside him. Barney found Buck in town. He did not shout. He did not argue. He attacked. He lifted his heavy walking cane and beat Buck with it, striking him across the head, back, and shoulders. Buck tried to block the blows, tried to escape, but Barney was stronger, older, and full of rage. People came running. Some shouted at Barney to stop. Others pulled him away. Buck was shaken, bruised, and humiliated. He had been attacked in public by a man nearly twice his age, and worst of all, it confirmed what he already knew. Barney Riggs was not going to stop. Barney walked away from the scene like a man who thought he had won something. But what he truly won was the beginning of his own end, because Buck was no gunslinger, but he was not going to die under a cane. That beating planted a seed in Buck's heart, a seed of fear, a seed of anger, a seed of self-defense. The young man spent that night thinking about the attack, thinking about Annie, thinking about his duty, thinking about surviving, and by the next morning, one thought had taken shape in his mind. If Barney comes at me again, I will protect myself. The sun rose over Fort Stockton on April 7th, 1902. It would be the last sunrise Barney Riggs ever saw. He woke up angry, as usual, still burning from the day before, still furious that a boy had dared resist him. He picked up his cane. He walked into town, and somewhere along that dusty street, Buck Shadbourne was waiting. Trouble was no longer coming. It had arrived. Morning came to Fort Stockton like any other day. The sun rose quietly above the flat Texas land. The wind pushed dust through the empty streets. A few shopkeepers opened their doors. A few ranch hands led horses toward the stables. Life moved slowly, but something was wrong in the air. Something heavy. Something waiting. People who saw Barney Riggs walking that morning felt it instantly. There was a storm inside him. His face was tight, his jaw locked, his steps hard and angry. He did not look at anyone. He did not greet anyone. He only held his worn wooden cane tightly in his hand, gripping it like a weapon. The day before, he had beaten Buck Shadbourne with that cane. He had humiliated the young man in public, and now the anger inside him had only grown overnight. It burned hotter, sharper, wilder. Barney was not walking to work. He was not walking to buy supplies. He was hunting. He wanted another confrontation. He wanted to show that he could control Buck. He wanted to prove that nobody, especially not a 21-year-old, could stand against him. Barney Riggs walked with the confidence of a man who had survived shootouts, ambushes, prison riots, and feuds. He believed he could survive anything. But this time, the danger was not in front of him. It was inside him. Buck Shadbourne woke up that same morning bruised, sore, and shaken. The marks from Barney's cane still burned across his back and arms. But the worst wound was not physical. It was the humiliation. Buck had always tried to be respectful. He never wanted trouble. He worked hard. He cared for Annie's family. He handled the court-awarded payments carefully and honestly. But Barney treated him like a child, like an obstacle he could crush whenever he pleased. The beating changed something inside the young man. He was tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of hoping Barney would stop. The people who spoke to Buck that morning said he was quiet, pale, and serious. Not angry, not violent, just prepared. He had made peace with the idea that he might have to defend himself. He tucked a small pistol inside his coat, not to kill anyone, not to start a fight, but because he knew deep in his bones that Barney was coming back, and in the Old West, when a dangerous man comes for you, you either face him or die. Around mid-morning, the two men finally saw each other. Buck was standing near the edge of town, talking to a friend outside a store. Barney appeared at the end of the street, walking with heavy steps, each one echoing across the quiet town. He saw Buck. He did not shout. He did not run. He simply changed direction and walked straight toward him. People nearby felt their stomachs tighten. They stepped back. They whispered. They knew the history. They knew the danger. A few moved quickly into doorways, peeking out from behind wood frames. Others backed away into the street. The town became silent. Dust rolled between the two men like a warning. Buck turned and saw Barney coming closer. The look in Barney's eyes was pure rage cold, sharp and deadly. Buck's heart pounded, but he stayed where he was. He remembered the cane. He remembered the blows. He remembered the humiliation. He would not run again. Barney stopped only a few feet away. He lifted the canes, lowly, deliberately, just high enough to threaten. His face was twisted with anger, as if the whole world had offended him. He said something under his breath. No one heard the exact words, but the tone was clear. A warning, a challenge, a promise of violence. Buck took a half step back. His hands trembled, but he did not look away. He knew Barney was seconds from striking him again. Maybe harder this time, maybe enough to kill Dot. And in that moment, the young man made a choice. He would not die under a cane. Barney raised the cane high, ready to swing, and Buck's hand moved. It moved out of fear. It moved out of survival. It moved because he had no other choice. Buck pulled a small pistol from his coat. Barney's eyes widened in shock. He had never imagined that Buck would fight back. For the first time in a long time, he realized he had misjudged someone. Then Buck fired. The first shot hit Barney in the chest. He staggered backward, stunned. The cane dropped from his hand and hit the ground with a soft thud. Buck fired again, and again, and again. Witnesses later said they heard 4 or 5 shots echo through the street. Some said Buck kept firing because he was terrified. Others said he didn't know if Barney would still attack. But everyone agreed on one thing. The man feared by so many was finally falling. Barney dropped to his knees. His breath came sharp and weak. His eyes were unfocused, as if searching for something he could no longer see. He touched the ground with one hand, trying to steady himself. People watched in stunned silence. Barney Riggs, gunfighter, outlaw, lawman, prisoner. Survivor collapsed, face forward, onto the dusty street. The cane that had beaten so many men lay beside him. The dust rose softly around his body, and the long, violent journey of Barney Riggs finally met its end. Town members ran forward. Some helped Buck, who was shaken uncontrollably. Others rolled Barney onto his back. His breathing was faint. His shirt was wet with blood. Someone shouted to carry him to the Kohler Hotel, the same hotel Annie now managed. Barney was lifted by several men and brought inside, laid on a bed, and given water. A doctor arrived but could do very little. Barney was slipping away. By the next day, April 8, 1902. Barney Riggs was dead. He was around 45 years old. The man who survived bullets, feuds, prison, and danger for decades, died in a quiet hotel room, killed not by an outlaw, not by a sheriff, not by a hired gun, but by a scared young man defending himself. After everything, Barney Riggs did not die in glory. He did not die in a famous duel. He did not die with his gun drawn. He died because he pushed a young man too far. For many people in Fort Stockton, the death of Barney Riggs was both shocking and strangely expected. Some said he got what he had been chasing for years. Others said it was a sad end for a troubled man. Some felt relief. Buck Shadbourne was charged with second-degree murder, but later acquitted. The evidence was clear. He acted in self-defense. Buck moved on with his life, eventually becoming a deputy sheriff and later a U.S. Customs agent. He lived a long, steady life, very different from the wild storm of Barney's. But for Barney Riggs, the story ended there, in dust, in silence, in the same town where he once walked with such power. When the sun rose over Fort Stockton the morning after the shooting, the town was quiet in a way it had not been for years. People woke slowly, opened their doors carefully, and walked the streets with cautious steps. News had already spread through every corner of the small Texas town. Barney Riggs was dead. The man who once walked these roads with a heavy stride. The man whose temper darkened rooms. The man who survived bullets, feuds, and prison, was gone. Inside the Kohler Hotel, the same place his ex-wife Annie now managed, his body lay still. A white sheet covered him. The loud, angry voice that once filled saloons and streets was silent forever. For many, it felt unreal. Barney Riggs had always seemed unbreakable, hot-tempered, dangerous, unstoppable. When he entered a saloon, conversation stopped. When he argued, people stepped back. He had survived things most men never would. It felt impossible that such a man could simply fall. But even the strongest men fall when pride blinds them, and Barney's pride had led him to this ending. The people of Fort Stockton reacted in different ways. Some felt relief. They had been afraid of Barney for years. They had watched him drink, shout, and start trouble. They had seen him raise his voice, swing his cane, and challenge people without reason. For them, the danger was finally over. Others felt sadness. Barney had once been brave. He had saved a man in Yuma Prison. He had worked hard at times, served as a deputy, and protected the town when asked. They remembered the younger Barney the cowboy, the rider, the man with talent and grit. They wondered what his life could have been if anger had not filled his heart. Some felt sympathy for Buck Shadbourne. They saw him as the true victim, a young man forced into a fight he never wanted. Many whispered that Buck had no choice. He had acted out of fear, not hate. They believed he lived with deep guilt afterward, and a few people felt conflicted, torn between the good and the bad in Barney's life. They knew he was not a simple man. He was a mix of courage and violence, loyalty and jealousy, kindness and cruelty. Men like Barney rarely leave behind simple memories. After his death, preparations were made for a quiet burial. There were no speeches, no long lines of mourners, no grand ceremonies like those given to famous lawmen. Barney did not receive the honor of a hero or the hatred of a villain. His burial was simple, almost humble. He was taken to the old Fort Cemetery at Fort Stockton. The ground was dry. The grass was thin. A few scattered mesquite trees stood nearby, their branches crooked and silent, as if watching over the graves of men who lived through the rough past. A wooden box was lowered into the earth. A handful of people stood nearby, some out of respect, some out of curiosity, some because they felt they should witness the end of a man who shaped their town for good or bad. Annie did not come close to the grave. She watched from a distance, her face unreadable. She had loved Barney once, deeply. She had feared him later, painfully. And now she simply stood still, letting the wind take pieces of her past away. After the burial, the dirt was smoothed, the marker placed, and life in Fort Stockton began to move on. But Barney's story did not end there. His name continued to echo through the town for years. Some nights, old cowboys gathered in saloons and told stories about him. Some exaggerated, some softened the truth. Some told the stories exactly as they remembered. They spoke of his speed with a gun. They spoke of the Yuma prison riot. They spoke of the Fraser Miller feuds. They spoke of the day he chased a man through the streets of Pecos and shot him. They even spoke of his good moments when he helped neighbors, protected women, or rode long distances to help friends. But just as quickly, they whispered of his temper, his drinking, his anger at Annie, his cruelty toward Buck. Barney Riggs was remembered as both hero and villain, depending on who told the tale. The trial for Buck Shadbourne came months later. Many expected drama. Some feared revenge. Some wondered if another feud would start. But Buck stood quietly in court, speaking simply and truthfully. He told the judge he feared for his life. He told how Barney threatened him, how Barney beat him, how Barney raised the cane again the next day. Witnesses agreed. Even people who respected Barney admitted he had gone too far. The court ruled the shooting as such. Buck walked free. He did not celebrate. He did not boast. He simply left Texas and moved to New Mexico, putting distance between himself and the tragedy that nearly destroyed him. There, Buck built a new life. He worked as a deputy sheriff, using calm judgment instead of anger. He served as a U.S. Customs agent, respected for his honesty. He married, raised a family, and lived a quiet, steady life. Everything Barney Riggs had never found, Buck found. Perhaps that was the final twist of fate. As the years passed, the memory of Barney Riggs faded from everyday life. New people moved into Fort Stockton. Young cowboys rode the trails without knowing his name. The saloons changed owners. The streets filled with new voices. But those who lived long enough to tell the stories kept his name alive and broken. Dusty Pieces. He was brave, some said. He was dangerous, others replied. He had too much pride. He lived through things nobody else could. He destroyed everything he touched. He could have been something great. He never learned to control his anger. He died the only way he could. Maybe all of them were right. Maybe none of them were. Barney Riggs lived in a time where the line between good and bad was thin. Sometimes men crossed it without knowing. Sometimes they stood on it for years. And sometimes, like Barney, they stumbled and fell. But in the end, Barney Riggs was Humana, complicated man shaped by a violent world, born in a rough time, carrying a heart made of both courage and shadows. His grave still rests in the old fort cemetery, a quiet reminder of a man who lived loudly, fought fiercely, and died suddenly on a dusty street long ago. Asterisk years passed after the death of Barney Riggs, and the dust of Fort Stockton slowly covered the place where he once walked. The world changed, towns grew, and new problems replaced old ones. But the story of Barney did not disappear. It lingered in quiet corners, in hushed conversations, in the memories of people who once knew him, more feared him. Barney Riggs became something else after death. A legend with sharp edges, not the clean hero people write about in books, not the pure villain found in old outlaw stories, but a complicated figure caught somewhere. In the middle dot, old cowboys who lived long enough to grow gray remembered Barney's name. When they sat around tables or leaned on porch rails, they talked about the man with the quick hands and quicker temper. Their stories were not polished. They were broken pieces of memories. Some talked about his courage, the day in Yuma prison, when he grabbed a fallen gun and saved the superintendent from being stabbed and killed. Some men called that moment pure bravery. Others talked about his violence, the sudden way he snapped, the anger that rose inside him without warning, the killing of Richmond Hudson, and the final beating he gave young Buck Shadbourne. A few talked about his kindness, how he occasionally helped neighbors, how he once rode miles to assist a sick friend, how he could be gentle with children or animals. But nearly everyone talked about his temper. Barney's temper was as famous as his gun, and just as dangerous. The more people talked, the more Barney turned into a kind of Old West riddle. A man who saved a life in prison, yet ruined his own life outside of it. A man who could be loyal in one moment and terrifying in the next. A man who fought for pride more than for justice. Historians later looked at his life and tried to understand it. They dug through old reports, newspaper clippings, court records, and family stories. They found many truths and just as many mysteries. Barney was hard to pin down because he lived in a time when stories were shaped by who told them. Newspapers exaggerated. Townspeople added their own feelings. Some hated him. Some admired him. Some feared him. Each group told a different version of the same events, so the real Barney Riggs became a mixture of truth and myth. One thing historians agreed on was this: Barney was a product of his time. He grew up in a world where guns were normal, where problems were solved, where justice depended on quick decisions, where survival was more important than laws. Men like Barney were shaped by the land hard, hot, and unforgiving. Violence was everywhere. People argued with fists, knives, and pistols. Life changed fast. One second a man was alive, the next second he was gone. So when people today judge Barney, they must understand the world he lived in. His choices may seem shocking, but for many frontier men, those choices were normal. But normal does not mean right. As time went on, some writers tried to picture Barney as a pure outlaw villain with cold eyes and a cruel heart. They highlighted his violence, the murders, the feuds, the beatings. They said he was the kind of man who brought trouble wherever he went. Other writers tried to paint him as a misunderstood fighter, a man who tried to survive, who loved fiercely, who wanted peace, but always found himself in storms he did not know how to escape. The truth probably sits somewhere between those two versions. Barney was not purely evil. He loved his wives, even if he failed them. He protected people at times. He worked honestly when he could. He saved a life when he did not have to. But Barney was also not innocent. He hurt people he cared about. He let jealousy poison him. He let anger lead him. And in the end, he pushed someone too far. Barney Riggs was human, full of strengths and flaws. In local Texas history, Barney remains a fascinating figure. Museums in Pecos and Fort Stockton sometimes speak of him. Old photos of the time show the dusty streets he once walked. His name appears in books about gunfighters and frontier law, but he is never placed in the same category as the famous outlaws or lawmen. Why? Because Barney did not live for fame. He did not lead a gang. He was not a sheriff known across the country. He was not part of a big national story. He was a local storm, one that struck small towns, saloons, and people's lives. His impact was real, but limited to a few places. And because of that, he stands almost like a hidden chapter of the Old West. Yet his story is important because it shows something that big outlaw legends often miss. The Old West was full of ordinary people who lived through extraordinary violence. Barney was one of them. His final lesson comes not from his gunfights, but from the way his life ended. A man who survived so many dangers was finally stopped by a young man who never wanted to fight him, a young man who only wanted peace, a young man pushed to a breaking point. Barney's death was not the death of a legend in a grand duel. It was the death of a man who could not control his anger, and that is the deepest part of his legacy. People remember him not just for the lives he took, but for the life he threw away, not just for the courage he sometimes showed, but for the damage he caused to himself and others. Barney Riggs reminds us that no matter how strong a person is, no matter how fearless, no matter how respected or feared, a man who cannot control himself eventually loses everything: his family, his peace, his freedom, and finally, his life. Today, if someone visits the old Fort Cemetery in Fort Stockton, they can still find a simple grave marker with his name. There is no statue, no tribute, no description of his deeds, just a quiet stone in dusty earth. And that might be the most honest picture of him. A man who lived loudly but rests quietly. A man remembered by some, forgotten by others. A man whose story teaches more about human weakness than about heroism. The legacy of Barney Riggs is not in the number of gunfights he survived. It is in the reminder that anger, when left unchecked, destroys everything it touches. Asterisk. The story of Barney Kemp Riggs does not end in the dust of Fort Stockton, nor in the quiet grave where he lies. His story lives on because it is more than a tale about guns, prison walls, or Old West violence. It is a story about a man who wanted to live his own way, but could never escape himself. Barney did not become famous like Wild Bill Hickok or Billy the Kid. His name does not appear in school books or major history documentaries. Most people today have never heard of him, and yet his life is one of the clearest windows into what the real American frontier was like: hard, unforgiving, lonely, and full of choices that shaped a person forever. This final chapter pulls the story together: his rise, his fall, and the meaning behind it all. Barney Riggs started as a simple farm boy in Texas and Arkansas, one of 7 children in a family that knew poverty, struggle, and danger. There was no sign in those early years that he would one day kill men, face juries, serve time in a brutal desert prison, or die on a lonely street. But the world he grew up in shaped him. There were no playgrounds or safe neighborhoods. There were no counselors or calm teachers. Instead, there were guns hanging on walls, men arguing over cattle, and neighbors who settled disagreements with bullets. A child raised in that world learned to act fast, hit back, and never show fear. Barney learned those lessons well too well. That fire inside him burned long before he ever pulled a trigger. It was a fire that wanted to win, a fire that refused to be wrong, a fire that believed anger was strength, and once that fire is lit, it is hard to put out. As a young man, Barney dreamed of simple things: a home, a family, peace. He tried to hold these things. He married young. He worked hard. He tried to stand proudly in the world. But life tested him, again and again. The accidental shooting of his friend Hugh Armstrong was the first heavy stone in his life. Whether it was truly a mistake or something else, only Barney knew. But the guilt followed him. The fear followed him. And he ran from the law because running felt easier than facing truth. He entered Arizona with a chance at a fresh start. He married again. He joined a ranching family. He rode under open skies and tried to settle. But the old anger was still there, hiding behind his smile. And when jealousy struck, when he believed Richmond Hudson had been with his wife Barney, chose violence again. That choice sent him to Yuma Prison. Most men would never leave Yuma alive, but Barney did. He saved the superintendent's life during a riot, risking his own safety to stop an attacker. In that moment, Barney showed the other side of his spirit, the part capable of courage, loyalty, and split-second heroism. The governor freed him. The world offered him another chance. It was a rare gift, but Barney did not know how to protect it. Back in Texas, Barney tried to rebuild again. He worked, made friends, gained respect, and married Annie Stella Frazier. She was loyal and strong, but she also saw the storm inside him. Barney's temper grew sharper. His drinking worsened. His patience faded. And even when he acted as a deputy, the line between lawman and outlaw remained thin beneath his boots. The famous Pecos Saloon gunfight showed both sides of him perfectly. He was fast and skilled, able to defend himself in a moment of danger. But he also chased a man down and shot him in the back. Some praised him. Some condemned him. Many feared him. Barney was a dangerous friend and a terrifying enemy. But even his toughness could not save his marriage. Annie left him. The divorce cut deep into his pride. And when the court put young Buck Shadbourne in charge of his payments, something broke in Barney. He felt insulted. He felt disrespected. He felt out of control. And men like Barney did not handle loss well. Barney's final downfall came not from a gunfight with outlaws or a dramatic showdown in a saloon. It came from something small and painfully ordinary. A family argument mixed with too much pride. Barney beat Buck Shadbourne with a cane in public. He believed he was still the strong man he once was. He believed the town still feared him. He believed Buck would always back down. But the world had changed, and Barney refused to change with it. So when Barney stormed into the street the next day, swinging his cane and ready to attack again, Buck did something few people ever dared to do. He stood his ground. He drew his pistol. He fired to survive. And Barney Riggs, who had escaped sheriffs, outlaws, judges, and death more times than anyone could count, collapsed in a dusty street. He died the next day. It was not heroic. It was not legendary. It was human. A man destroyed, not by enemies, but by the anger he carried everywhere. Today, when people talk about Barney Riggs, they do not speak of glory. They speak of consequences. Historians say he was a reminder of how thin the line was between lawman and outlaw. They describe him as a talented man who wasted his chances, a brave man who made violent choices, and a tragic man who never defeated the one enemy he needed to, himself. His grave sits quietly in the old Fort Cemetery in Fort Stockton. No tourists visit it. No flowers lie on the stone. No historians give tours there. It is just a simple resting place, worn by time and wind, and maybe that is fitting. Barney lived loudly, chaotically, and dangerously. He died suddenly and silently. He rests quietly now. The final lesson of Barney Riggs is not about gunfights or prisons or outlaw feuds. It is about self-control. A man may be strong, he may be skilled, he may be fearless, but if he cannot master his own temper, his own jealousy, his own pride, he will lose everything. Barney Riggs lost his marriages. He lost his peace. He lost his freedom. And finally, he lost his life. Not because he was weak, but because he never learned to stop fighting ghosts inside himself. In the end, Barney Riggs leaves behind a story that is not just about the Old West. It is about being human, about struggle, about choices, about how a person can be brave and broken at the same time. He reminds us that even the toughest gunslinger cannot outrun his own shadow. And when the dust settles, what remains is not the legend, but the lesson.